Good evening for those of you who already joined us for the Forage Webinar Series. The program will start straight up at 7 o'clock. So we've got a little over 30 minutes before it starts. Appreciate you folks logging in. If you want to click on the chat box and just let me know where you're from. That's always interesting. We're asked the other folks who log on to do the same. Let yours stay up there.
Sounds good.
I do have it recording now. So if folks who are just now logging in, if you want to go ahead to the chat and tell us where you're from, that's always kind of interesting to see where the audience is at. Well, good evening and welcome to the Forage Webinar Series. We started this a year ago and had a lot of interest in continuing it. It worked really well as an evening program, so that's why we're meeting this evening. We've got three presenters who will be the program, and then we'll have a Q&A session. We're more than happy if you want to, at the end, unmute and ask questions directly, or you can go ahead and ask or type in questions and we'll make sure the presenters get them going. To start out our evening is Madeline Wusenberg. She's an agriculture climatologist with Iowa State University Extension, and she is one of the people who's truly dedicated to climate resilience and Iowa's agriculture and food systems. Tonight, she's going to share with us some recent climate outlooks and where we can find information that's reliable as we move into this planting season. Madeline, as I always say, the podium is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Fred. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat for questions and hope to get all those answered. But welcome to the webinar. And I'm going to be talking about the spring weather outlook. And as Fred mentioned, I'll be talking about some resources. I've had some technical difficulties on my end. Can I get okay that you can still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right, we'll get started. So in this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about past weather, some short-term forecasts, look at soil moisture data, talk about the El Nino Southern Oscillation, look at the Climate Prediction Center outlooks, and then end with some resources and recommendations. So in the past 30 days across the upper Midwest, we've been looking at slightly drier than normal for quite a bit of Iowa. We have this northeast corner where we've gotten anywhere from 1 to 3 inches above normal for precipitation. And Nebraska is really looking dry. Southern Wisconsin here is on the drier side. So, and then what really sticks out is this area to the south of Iowa, really Missouri and Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky there. just constantly being pelted this spring in the last 30 days with precipitation, and some areas seeing 7.5 or more inches above normal for this time period in April. Then if we look at the departure from normal temperature, we see for the most part, the Midwest was slightly warmer than normal, anywhere from about 0 to 3, maybe even spots of 4 degrees on average above normal. So again, this isn't every single day was above normal temperatures, but in general, on average, in the past 30 days, we're looking at warmer than normal temperatures. For short-term weather, we have this low pressure swinging through Iowa today. That's what brought our pop-up showers here in central Iowa really all day. I think a lot of northern Iowa saw some rain as well. So I'll provide resources at the end where you can view that precipitation data. But yeah, just this cold front moving across the state, creating moisture availability and that upward motion in the atmosphere to provide instability for these pop-up showers throughout the day. After the low moves south, we see this high pressure setting in. And in the next 1 through 7 days, Iowa is expecting to get anywhere from 0 to a ½ inch of rain across the state. So slightly near to below normal in terms of precipitation for the next 7 days. Normally in the beginning of May, we would really expect closer to about an inch of rain per week. This is the current drought monitor report, U.S. Drought Monitor. This was issued today, and we saw that there's been quite a bit of drought removal in much of central Iowa. So a lot of that yellow has gone away in the state. All of the drought in kind of to our east, where Ohio last year, ending the year, they were really in a serious drought situation. And we're just starting to see some of that drought in the upper Midwest starting to clear out. However, in the high plains and the Southwest US, there's definitely some areas suffering from that drought. And I'm primarily concerned about rangeland out in western Nebraska and eastern Colorado and Wyoming. These are two different products, but showing very similar data. So we're seeing on the left is the Sportless. This is a NASA product. It's derived via satellite data. And so it's looking at the 0 to 100 centimeter profile and estimating the soil moisture percentile. Anywhere where gray means we're right there in the middle, average, looking good. So for the most part across the state, as for May 1st, 2025, we're looking pretty good for soil moisture. Again, as you move to our east or our west, things start to get drier. Wisconsin is pretty wet there yet, and definitely gets wetter to our south, where we saw that dark blue to purple blob from the 30-day departure rainfall. On the right, we have the calculated soil moisture ranking percentile. This is a product from the Climate Prediction Center. So this is averaged for the entire month of April and shows the ranking of percentile of soil moisture in the top 1.6 meters of the soil profile. And we see here, again, most of Iowa is looking in that normal range. But again, as you move east or west, things are looking drier. We continue to see that green blob to our south, where Illinois, Indiana, Missouri really were getting hammered with all of that rainfall. And we do see a drier or a wetter signal, excuse me, again in Wisconsin. So a lot of agreement between these two models in terms of where and how severe some of this dryness or wetness is. I also wanted to show this simulated soil moisture. This is the ERA 5 land model, which is estimating the 0 to 1 meter soil moisture. And this is for the Ames area. So we see that red line is the climatology, and that black line is data for this location. This is the Ames actually, this is just kind of summarized for the general Ames area. So taking multiple grid cells and finding the average. And we see that in terms of soil moisture, we're staying fairly close to normal, to that red line, that climatology. And for almost all of this year, we've stayed within that ±1 standard deviation. So we are looking pretty good when it comes to identifying and determining what is normal for soil moisture. And at least in the Ames area, we're doing pretty well. And if you want to look at other locations, the link on the side, I'm so sorry it's such a long link. I'm happy to share that in the chat after this. But this is a plotting tool where you can look at the same type of chart for the location of your choice. All right, we'll get to ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. This is a naturally occurring global teleconnection that has been observed for hundreds of years. And during the 1960s, scientists connected these links between the changing patterns in the sea surface temperatures along the equator off the coast of Peru and how atmospheric pressure systems were changing in North America. So El Nino is coined for the warm phase. So when those sea surface temperatures are warmer than normal, and that results in weaker trade winds. It's still somewhat unknown if the weaker trade winds are creating the warm water moving further east, or if the warm water moving east is slowing those trade winds. So they're really interconnected, and it's hard to differentiate which came first. It's really that fun chicken and the egg. So La Nina then would be the opposite, the cool phase when those sea surface temperatures are cooler than normal and we're seeing strong trade winds. And these changes in sea surface temperatures affect the distribution of atmospheric circulation patterns. And this can change the intensity and position of our jet streams. So that was a lot of words and not a lot of pictures. So these are some pictures to explain really what's going on. And so we see with ENSO, these areas of upward motion and downward motion, and where there's warmer than normal or cooler than normal seawater is really playing a role in how these high pressures and low pressures are setting up and influencing North American weather. So I'm so sorry about these images. El Nino is on the top on the left hand and it's on the bottom on the right hand, and vice versa. So making an X to connect those La Nina and El Nino figures. But really the main times where we really care about ENSO is particularly in the winter. And the reason for that is in the summer, our atmosphere becomes more tightly coupled with the land surface. And so our local weather is more highly influenced by that localized surface heating, creating those pop-up thunderstorms. But I just wanted to give background on what ENSO is because I wanted to show the ENSO outlook. And so we are in our final La Nina advisory. This is from the Climate Prediction Center. And each month they provide an ENSO alert system status. And that current status is final La Nina advisory. Then we can look at, so for March, April, May, is how we read this map with sets of 3 months. And so the first set here, MAM, is March, April, May. The next set is April, May, June, July, June, July, August, and so on. So we can look by season what the percent chance of La Nina, El Nino, or ENSO neutral conditions are. And so ENSO neutral is when the sea surface temperatures are within plus or minus 0.5 degrees Celsius of normal. So as we can see right now, 99% chance of being in ENSO neutral for March, April, May. We are really seeing those ENSO neutral conditions right now. That ENSO neutral state is intending, based on the predictions, to hang on for a while as we go into fall and winter. And as we look into winter for the end of 2025 into early 2026, we see a 43% chance of ENSO neutral conditions, and a 38% chance of La Nina during our next coming winter. So something to be thinking about. I will be providing more information as the year goes on what conditions we'll start to expect with La Nina, a potentially La Nina winter right now. And so neutral and La Nina are somewhat neck and neck if we look at the probabilities, with El Nino lagging behind. So greater chances for ENSO neutral or La Nina, but that's where we're sitting as of right now. So for spring and summer, greatest chances for ENSO neutral conditions. All right, next we are going to look at the Climate Prediction Center outlooks. And I include this slide every single time, but really the bottom bullet point is the most important. So the way we read these, and maybe the two bottom ones, but these probabilities do not indicate the magnitude of above or below normal conditions, but rather, for example, a 60 to 70% chance for below normal temperatures gives greater confidence, so confidence, not magnitude, that temperatures will be colder than normal compared to a 40 to 60% chance, but not that temperatures will be 60 to 70% colder. So I just like to throw that out there so we're all on the same page, and hopefully many of you have seen these maps before. So these are produced by the Climate Prediction Center. The 6 to 10 day outlooks are produced every few days. So on April 30th, we got a new outlook for May 6th through 10th, and it's showing really this strong signal for above normal temperatures during this 5-day, really 4 to 5 day period. And so from May 6th to 10th, we can pretty confidently count on temperatures being above normal. Keep in mind that these outlooks do not differentiate the daily high versus daily low temperature. So this is an average daily temperature for an average time period. And because we can't differentiate those two, or they don't differentiate those two variables in this product, we can't really say that the high temperatures are going to be extremely, extremely high. Perhaps those nighttime temperatures will be warmer than normal with fairly normal daytime temperatures. So we just can't say for sure when those extreme temperatures may occur, but we do see this general signal of above normal temperatures. And again, for the same time frame, the precipitation outlook is showing much of Iowa and definitely the Ohio River Basin leaning below normal for precipitation. This is not a terrible thing for a lot of that area, especially where they've gotten lots and lots of rain. If they are looking at getting into the field, this is definitely a good signal for them to get planters out and any other management that needs to be done. This is the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook and precipitation outlook. So again, issued April 30th, valid May 8th through the 14th. It's really fun when our outlooks line up with the day of the month. That doesn't always happen, but it's going to be a good, at least first few weeks of the month. But again, that warm signal hanging on for much of the upper Midwest and High Plains region. And we've got, again, just that slight dry signal hanging on for the first 2 weeks in April. We see next the 3 to 4 week temperature and precipitation outlook. This is valid for May 10 through the 23rd. And just again, we're still seeing this slight 55 to 60% chance of above normal temperatures. So a little over half. So maybe better than flipping a coin, but not much in terms of if temperatures will be above or below or normal. So just again, we're seeing that signal in the models that temperatures are likely to be warmer than normal, and we have equal chances for precipitation as we get to the middle to end of May. And so this is not really surprising, given in spring with our climate, our longer term climate models, and even our weather prediction models, there's this thing called the spring barrier, and it really is, in essence, where spring conditions are just more difficult to predict than winter conditions because we're transitioning from this synoptic or really large scale weather pattern system to more of these localized mesoscale pop-up thunderstorm type situations. And so even in areas where it says below normal chances for precipitation, they certainly could still get precipitation during this time period. And I have one more after this, but this is the general May outlook. And so generally for the month of May, it's expected to be warmer than normal for the upper Midwest and especially the High Plains region. And there's a signal for below normal chances for precipitation. And then finally, this was issued April 17th. This is the seasonal temperature and precipitation outlook. So it's valid for the months May, June, and July, and gives us a general idea of what this 3-month seasonal time period may look like. Again, issued April 17th. So we're looking forward to the next climate outlook that comes from the Climate Prediction Center for the seasonal outlooks. But again, in general, that warmer and equal to drier outlook is what we're seeing. Next, I wanted to show the seasonal drought outlook. So this is a product from the US Drought Monitor, and it's really showing drought development likely for much of the High Plains, upper Midwest. Anywhere that there's yellow is drought development likely during the next 3-month period. Or excuse me, this is valid, yep, from May through July 31st. And anywhere there is brown is where drought is likely to persist from May through the end of July. Keep in mind that spring is our wettest season and summer is becoming increasingly dry. So it's really somewhat unsurprising that we are seeing chances for drought development and drought hanging on, especially in places where it's already dry, but especially by the end of July, things tend to look a little dry around Iowa. So some considerations I would recommend, given the data I presented here, would be when we are under drought conditions, consider rotational grazing. And that will just help reduce stress on already drought stress or potentially drought stressed forages and allows for that vegetation to regrow and have better growth in their root systems, which increases nutrient uptake from that land, reduces soil erosion, and reduces nutrient loss from that land, and really helps for some of those good soil health practices and that carbon sequestration capacity, and can help improve the herd health because they're having high nutrient dense vegetation to graze on. And other considerations would be just keep in mind that when there are above average temperatures plus below average precipitation, that can really cause stressful conditions both for the livestock and the forages. And keep in mind that we think about on days where the atmosphere may be thirstier is when we're really going to see some of that moisture stress on plants, especially when there's high air temperatures, low precipitation, and potentially low moisture available in the air. The air is really going to want to pull that out of the soil, pull that out of the plants. And so just rotational grazing is really going to build resilience in your pastures against those challenges. This is a list with some resources I recommend. The first is the Growing Degree Day plotting tool, and you can plot for alfalfa, grass, wheat, and several other crops. So when you open the link, it takes you to a map and you can scroll and click your exact location. It will plot for the specific crop you're interested in, and you're able to change the number of days to maturity for your cultivar. And then it will show when you have average freeze dates in the spring and the fall for your location, and will show how are you lining up compared to the climatology of accumulated growing degree days so far this year. So highly recommend that. This second link is to the soil moisture network. So if you're interested in looking at soil moisture data or really any meteorological data from a location near you, you're able to use this link. I'm so sorry for my out-of-state friends. This is only within Iowa, this network, but please reach out if you have questions. I'm happy to share resources from nearby states as well. The link, third link is for live radar and National Weather Service warnings. So highly recommend checking this out if you're thinking, I want to be able to view radar during severe weather season. We are in spring and everyone should be weather aware. And then last is a resource from the climate hubs that talks about rotational grazing and resiliency. And this is where I got the figure from the previous slide. Thank you so much for listening. And at my QR code here, there's more weather and climate resources. They do expand beyond Iowa, so feel free to browse those for all kinds of states in the High Plains and Midwest. And on the right there is my contact information, so feel free. And then Fred, am I able to take questions now or should I wait?
I think we've got a couple of minutes if we've got folks who have burning questions. And I'd say we're a small enough group, just go ahead and unmute and ask your question. We'll give a couple of seconds there.
And were there any questions in the chat?
I didn't see any, but there are two questions that I have.
There's none in the chat right now.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just not able to click on the chat. It's not popping up for me.
When you use the term compared to normal, hotter than normal, wetter than normal, what is normal? And it's not facetious. There's a time frame there that I'm trying to get to.
Yes, absolutely. That is a fabulous question. I definitely should have explained that. So when we're thinking about compared to normal, we are using the climatology. So every location has its own climatology and it's based on observation. So it's 1991 through 2020. And it's for every location, taking the data from every single day between those years and finding the average. And so when I show the maps like this, and I'm saying leaning above, it's leaning above for this region. So not comparing, obviously Minnesota's normal is different than Texas's normal. And so that is taken into account when we think about these probabilities of above or below normal temperatures and precipitation.
And it's about 30 years.
Yep, 30 years. And our current most recent climatology is data from 1991 to 2020.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions, but I've got one more. Being an old person, I don't remember the wind like we're having now. So how much moisture do we actually lose with high temperatures and wind? Is there a formula we can put to that, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we think about kind of water balance, it's unfortunately a little more complicated than just when we think about like wind chill. And we're able to put nice charts together and we know that if the relative humidity is this and the air temperature is this, or the air temperature is this and the wind speed is this, we get a wind chill. Unfortunately, it's not that simple because the way different soils are holding on moisture is different. The way different plants are holding on moisture is different. the thirstiness of the atmosphere is varying across time and space. So, I wish it were that simple to say the wind speed is this much, we can expect to lose this much moisture. But unfortunately, it's just not quite that simple. One thing we do know is that when the air is dry and the land surface is dry and it is windy, that's when we have those opportunities for fire hazard. And this spring especially has been very windy. So there was a lot of news releases going out about how windy this spring was, this March was in a lot of the US, but especially the upper Midwest. And those are all good things. I think when we think about really long-term wind climatology, we need to be a little hesitant because the technology we have to measure wind now is far different than it was 100 years ago. So we have more precise measurements of wind now. And so it takes some statistical analysis to really compare those types of data sets. If we look at the last 50 years, I certainly feel a little more comfortable with that type of comparison. But yes, it's been windy. Dew points are going to be really important for when we think about how windy it is and how much moisture we're potentially losing. If those dew points are really low and it's really windy, absolutely we're losing moisture from the surface because that wind is creating mixing in the atmosphere and it's taking that water and moving it away. So I would say there's not a beautiful equation, but those are certainly two variables to consider.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Sarah, are you seeing any questions?
I am not, but Madeline, if you can get the chat to work now when you're not sharing screen, can you put your links in? I caught a couple of them, but you had a lot of great ones and I couldn't type fast enough.
Yes, not a problem. I am able to view the chat now that I'm unsharing.
There you go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Well, next up is Paul McGill. He's the owner and manager of Rock Valley Hay Auction, and he's going to share his insights as far as what he's seeing in the marketplace. And I know this is an unfair thing to ask a marketer, but look into his crystal ball and kind of give us a handle on what our forage situation or costs are going to be as we look down the road. Paul, thank you for being on board today. And as I always say, the podium's yours.
Okay, thank you, Fred. I really appreciate it. I think first of all, what I'm going to talk about is the history of our business. I've been in the hay auction for 29 years here on my 29th year. Basically, what we do is we're the middlemen like any auction, and we're similar to livestock auction. We get our hay from all different areas, depending on the year, honestly, where there's an abundance of hay and where there's a shortage. That's where it comes and goes. So half of our customers are sellers, half our customers are buyers. So tonight I want to primarily focus on our buyers. We are situated up in the northwest corner of Iowa and Sioux County here, and we're about half dairy, half feedlots here. And over the years, things have changed a lot in a lot of ways. But when I first started, there's these things called small square bales, which were the thing. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, we pretty much eliminated them, or I shouldn't say eliminated them, but moved away from them. Went into like agriculture in general. It's went from smaller operators to larger operators, and that's how things have progressed in the hay business as well. So we get most of our hay, generally speaking, west and north of us, and depending on the year, sometimes we get a lot out of Nebraska, but primarily East River, South Dakota, and western Nebraska, or excuse me, western Minnesota, and also northeast Nebraska, north central Nebraska. That's normal. This past year, with the low prices and the inventory being very high, it's become a lot more localized market. We've drawn the reins in quite a bit. Most of the hay is coming here from within 150 miles of Rock Valley here, and most of our buyers are generally from Northwest Iowa. The large majority of them are. However, we do sell all over the country, but 95% of it is, in the northwest corner. When I say northwest corner, I mean from Highway 20 east about Highway 71 up north to Interstate 90, and then back to say Sioux Falls and down 29. That's where the bulk of our buyers are from. And the reason why we have the hay auction here is we're pretty heavy saturated with livestock in this area, and the land values are very high, partially because of that, but also it's the buyers are or the livestock guys are more apt to use their ground for producing corn silage, where they get a lot more tonnage per acre than they would say alfalfa or something like that. And that's the way they look at it, and that's absolutely fine. That's just the way it is. Okay, so moving on, as far as the price trends and so forth, basically the hay marketing year is from about June 1st to June 1st. And we're nearing the end of this past one, which I think all hay sellers will be thankful to be done with this past year, because it has seen significantly lower prices than we have for years, and coming off of several years of pretty strong prices. Excuse me. Okay. With that said, the inventories were just much higher than they have been. Especially like in Minnesota and so forth. I think they were 140 to 165% the year before, which is a little deceptive. This year before, they're actually down on their production. Pardon me. We have we're going to go through this next coming year. That on the supply side, we're still coming into the new hay season with a lot of inventory. The May 1st is and December 1st are the only two reports, the government reports that come out. We have not, that will come out actually about 15th of May or 10th of May. It'll be reported, but all expectations are that it'll be, way above normal as far as the inventory, and way above the last couple of years. So that the overall effect has definitely been a lower hay market than we've seen for quite some time. And last year was the first year in my career that there really was not a place to go with hay, as meaning there wasn't a droughty area anywhere. So we didn't have anywhere to go with it out of the area for like a secondary market, which is extremely rare. We sent a little bit of hay down in southern Missouri and so forth, but not very much. And then with transportation costs, there's limitations obviously to what you can financially or feasibly move the hay very far. So that's for that. So moving on into this new hay season from a production side or supply side on alfalfa, it looks like I'm not aware of anywhere that's had winter kill. It's a little bit early up here. The alfalfa is, 2, 3, 4 weeks away from cutting, and but it looks like it's looking very healthy, and we've had some rains recently that'll get it going. Everyone was terribly worried about the droughty areas. We are going the first cutting. It looks like it's going to be okay. After that, we'll see what happens. But anyway, what normally happens is the hay market, because of the season, is normally it peaks about this time of year, usually the first week of May, end of April, right in there. That tradition that was that way until about probably 6 to 8 years ago. Then that trend started moving later down through the month of May, and now usually about the Memorial weekend is usually about when it peaks out. Obviously, that depends on when the new hay is put up. And it looks like we're going to be pushed back a couple weeks here yet, but we're seeing a little bit of appreciation in the market. And that goes into, so when the new hay comes in, which will be starting in, I'll say about a month or short month. And the first, on the alfalfa side, the first loads that come in are usually very well received by dairies, assuming it's put up correctly. And then, however, the feedlots and so forth do not want new hay. They don't want hay until it's been put up probably a month. The reason is if they're grinding the hay will just naturally heat up if it's ground and it's fresh. So there's usually a lag there, and it's normally during the month of June, where we're selling old hay and new hay, and it kind of transitions into all new, usually by the end of June or at least 4th of July, when the second cuttings is being put up also. There tends to be pretty good interest from the dairies, like I said earlier, on the fresh new, well, all cuttings honestly when it comes in, but when the first cutting. And then after that, that's kind of when we get to establish what the yields were, and that will move the market one way or the other. Right now it's lined up for probably a pretty good supply, which is going to be, will hurt the market most likely, which when I say that, it's all relative because we're coming off a very low market. So that pretty much means a sideways track here looking into about the new hay, into about the 1st of July or so. After that, it's truly dependent on, the supply and the demand at that time. The demand side, I should speak to, was all winter long was down or less than normal, primarily because the winter was pretty nice to most of us in the area throughout the last winter, which decreased consumption therefore it carries the inventory longer. Excuse me. So normally the market will kind of be at the stronger end, get some new hay in, and it'll drop into about the 4th of July. The alfalfa is pretty much totally flipped into the new hay. The grass is a whole nother subject there. I'll get into that in a minute, but we have there is a pretty good amount of interest in the new hay once it's been cured, fully field cured and so forth. Into the dairy rations, they tend to like it fresher, which is good. But buying hay in the summertime can be a little dangerous as far as you need to be aware of the actual quality of the hay, primarily the moisture content when it's baled, and if you can find a good source and a trusted source or producer, I should say, on that. But I'm looking at on the alfalfa side, I do believe we're probably going to be in a sideways track, maybe slightly stronger than last year, just because last year when we got into, well, the month of July was not a good month to put up hay almost everywhere in the north central region, primarily because of, if it wasn't rain, it was humidity. And the wind didn't blow, so it wasn't very conducive to making good hay. And a lot of people had that issue. At the same time, there was enough moisture to have pretty good yields, and we've been fighting low quality hay all year as far as that goes. So that's true with both the alfalfa and even probably more so on the grass hay than the alfalfa. On the grass hay, I'll back up on that. So the hay marketing season is the same. It's basically June 1st to June 1st. And the grass market is really low currently for average, mid-range, and lower hay. It's perking up on the higher quality grass hay, and that's pretty much common sense. So, and the reason being, some of the ditches and so forth, the brome grass is growing up. So if you're going to feed cattle in fences, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, I guess. So you need to feed them a little greener hay, and they're just better demand for that. But if it's just plainer grass hay, the bulk and the fill, they are not very interested in that, because the substitutes are very cheap too, including uh, corn stalks and straw, and that's all plays into it. There is, but okay, moving back on with the grass here. So we got usually the new grass hay is pretty well received, assuming it's baled dry. That's the big assumption always. So when you look at our market on our website, I'd suggest taking and the median price more so than the high or the low, because there's always some just fantastic hay that brings a price that you're going, wow, that's a lot. And then you look at the bottom load, it's like, what was that garbage? Sometimes it's very true. So can average it out, and a lot of people make that mistake. I do believe, look, my grandpa was told me everything in moderation. I don't think he's talking about hay necessarily, but if you're judging the hay market, that's probably a good way to go. So, okay, then the grass, as first gets baled, if it's put up nice, there's a lot of demand for it, both in the feedlots and the beef cattle operations. They like the lure, the smell of the fresh grass, and the color helps it as well. And it's just fresher hay, always just better, or I mean more attractive to the cattle and also the buyers. So that's pretty much common sense. So usually in June, as the first, the grass is put up early, gets put up, there's a good demand for that, and that usually sells quite well. And it's early cuts, so it's got higher protein levels and so forth. It's just better quality hay. Then as it progresses, gets into July, there's a lot of, like, out west and so forth, there's a lot of people that cut their grass hay really late, and that quality of the hay goes down. But at the same time, the demand, it seems to get, it seems like the government was always adding CRP to they're allowing them to bale it and so forth, which the hay farmers don't like, but that's the way it is. So what it does is increases the supply on everything. In the month of July, there's almost always a pretty harsh correction in the hay market, and it usually drops. It's really hard to be real specific, but anywhere from $10 to $30 a ton, depending on the year and other circumstances. So, and that's true with alfalfa and grass, but they both tend to drop about the same time. It's usually the first half of July. In a drought year, extreme drought year, that's the opposite of that is true, because people are realizing they do not have access to the hay that they thought they would, back at this time of year. So that is, I'm starting to sound like a politician here. There's a lot of variables, and this crystal ball is pretty cloudy this year, but it's probably safe to say, I think we're probably looking at a little higher than last year, but I don't think it's going to be way up there. The substitutes are cheap. The future looks that way. The export deal isn't turning out very well, in generally speaking, but that could change any day, every day. Excuse me. And then also it looks like Madeline was saying earlier, the South had quite a bit of rain. When I say the South, like southern Missouri, and also northern Arkansas and so forth. In that area, they've had a lot of rain in a short amount of time. They were getting extremely dry. We are lucky here we were pushing dry in our hay drawing area just west of me in the eastern half of South Dakota was very dry. They've had some recovery on that. Hopefully it'll stay that way. But anybody that knows anything about South Dakota, even the wetter areas can flood out and dry out in the same year. That's just the way it is. And it seems like that weather patterns moving over this direction a little bit. But anyway, that's so my guess, or my prediction, I should say, that sounds a lot better, is the market will be probably trend with the seasonal cycles, um, uh, probably trend starting out maybe in that $10 to $20, a little bit higher than what it was the year before. So, but last year was a tough year to figure out because, as many of you know, here in Rock Valley, we had 15 to 20 inches of rain in 24 hours. That really did not help anything, and it wasn't to that extreme in other areas, but they had a lot of rain in a short amount of time. So, but moving on from that, getting into the fall, the typical cycle is the hay market perks up. There's kind of a downward trend through from the 4th of July through Labor Day, and then it starts to perk up during harvest season, September, October, and then the calves are coming in the feedlots traditionally at that time up till, and so there's usually an upward trend from basically the middle to the end of September until Thanksgiving time, and that's happens probably 9 out of 10 years, an upward trend in there, and I think that cycle is going to continue. I don't see why it isn't, but and then you get into December. December is always a fickle month because it almost takes Mother Nature to scare the people into the buyers to increase the demand. But we've had so many years in a row of nice winters. Our memories, or the buyers' memories, are quite short as far as, but they are in general much better at continuing to, to carrying more inventory than they used to. When I first started in the hay auction, there'd be a dozen people showing up. They didn't have feed for that afternoon or hay for that afternoon, and that got pretty touch and go at times. And now most operations carry more inventory and extend that out to, a week to 2 to 3 to some cases longer than that. So that's, probably better management and organization as far as that goes. There is a lot of debate on whether to contract hay and so forth. That I honestly feel that's kind of up to the individual buyers, what works best for their position. It's hard to guarantee quality from a seller's perspective, and it's hard to get consistent quality from a buyer's perspective. And that's true with everything, all of it, but that's there is some interest in that. I do feel the cycles are going to be the same throughout the coming year, but at different levels. And we had the same thing last year. We had the same cycles with a major hit in July that I've never seen before, and I think hopefully we'll get through that this year. Everyone's thinking that they'd be able to buy hay for pennies on a dollar this summer. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I kind of seriously question it, but I do think we'll probably, things will probably straighten out a little bit this year. I hope it'll be easier on the blood pressure. I do know that, and I hope that we will be able to move on from that. As far as current supply for the next 3 to 4 weeks, there seems to be a pretty good amount of hay. However, it's hard to get the sellers motivated to sell because most of the sellers are coming from drier areas and are very concerned about drought. And from their perspective, there is, the hay market's about as low as it can get. What's the risk of holding it? Well, obviously, hay is a perishable item, and that is probably the biggest reason not to. So it depends, and a lot of them, I always say, it depends how hungry the sellers and buyers are. It's, when I say hungry, I mean financially stable on that. And a lot of the sellers have been hurt, but they still have some footings left, where they're not desperate like we've seen in the past to sell hay. But another year like this, it might be a different story. But there is a lot of hay being held back. And today the market, we had, our quality of alfalfa was just fantastic. I'd say half of the hay was actually lactating quality, probably, of the alfalfa, which is quite rare, honestly. And so that on paper, it looks like it was quite an upmarket, and that is deceptive because the quality was much, much better. The same quality hay probably sold pretty close to what it has in the past few weeks. So, and that's true with alfalfa primarily. The grass, what we had today was, I'm not proud of our quality. We had a lot of low mid-range grass, and that sold about the same as it is. So I did that. That's kind of where I'm at there, Fred. I don't know if there's any questions now or later, either way.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions come in.
Okay, sure.
How about Sarah? Have you seen any come in?
Nope, nothing yet.
Okay. I've got one that I'm interested in. Are you seeing a hay species shift? I know growing up, we had Timothy at the auction and we had alfalfa, and now I think I'm seeing some species shift. Is that true?
Okay, yeah, there is some of it, like in our area here, there isn't, there's some, most of the Timothy we get is from north of us a ways. There has been some like triticale that has kind of made some inroads in the last, I'm speaking 10 to 15 years. And another thing, well, like millet, German millet primarily, and Japanese millet has, that started back 15 years ago. People, well, German millet's been around longer than I have probably, but it's made a comeback, I'd say, and it's usable for people that have, well, what a lot of people are doing with it, they plant it late, like where there was either flood damage to some farms, or they just couldn't get in and plant it or something. It was like a saving crop for the year, I guess. And so yeah, from that standpoint, yeah, we're too far north for like Bermuda grass or anything like that, so we really haven't seen that. When you first said species, I was thinking you're talking about like alfalfa varieties and so forth. Yeah, that has changed quite a bit too. We've seen a fair amount of like multi-leaf and then the Roundup Ready, and that type of stuff has been coming in. I'm really more so in the marketing side than the production end of it. Whenever you start with new product, I'll say, or new variety or species, it usually, we have to develop a market for it first. So the first people doing it usually are at a great disadvantage because they're literally the ones taking the risk and doing all the hard work that way. And it just and usually over time it will gain some acceptance. And but that's, if that's an answer to your question.
Yep,
That's what I have.
sure did. Jim asked us what package of bales sells the best for you.
Okay, so we're in an unusual area. Most of our farms are larger, so anything bigger bales sell better. Round bales or mid or large squares sell probably the best. Like I first started out with small squares, pretty much have been eliminated. There's still it's a very niche market, and it probably more so into like horse markets, but we are not there with the horse market. And you go into cities and that type of stuff. So I'd say large round bales or large square bales sell the best. Baleage does not in our northwest corner of Iowa. At the auction, I have a hard time selling it, for what it's worth, because the buyers it's sold to smaller operators that will use it for a longer time. The large dairies and feedlots don't have much interest in it because they want enough, supply of the same quality to make it worth switching the rations for.
Okay. Got one last question here. Scott asked, have cover crop forages affected or changed the Rock Valley hay business over the past few years?
The cover crop, as far as, honestly, I'll say it kind of backwards. You mean cover crops for alfalfa, I assume? Or just general cover crops? But
Let's do general cover crops.
Okay. As far as like using like cover crops like oats or something for alfalfa, that doesn't happen very often anymore. They pretty much direct seed in the alfalfa, and that makes one cutting that usually has weeds in it, and but the cover crops, if we're selling them like oats as a cover crop, it it sells all right. I mean, it isn't as big of a deal as it used to be probably. And then we also have had quite a few people selling actual oats hay in the past few years, coming out of northeastern South Dakota primarily, and some of that has been put up just excellent. They put it in at wet, because the ground was a little wet, and they um, come out with it. And then it's dry when they're harvesting it, which I never had any luck trying to put any oats hay up like that. But it looks beautiful. Still got pretty good green color to it, and that is sells quite well, if that's the question. The As far as other cover crops, there isn't too many others used that I'm aware of, I guess, that we sell at the auction.
Hey, thank you very much, Paul. We appreciate your comments and insights. Again, if people do have questions, they can get a hold of you, and I put your website up in the chat, so if they need to get the information, they can go there and ask you directly. So thank you again. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Our final presenter today is Dr. Shelby Gruss. She's an Iowa State Extension forage specialist. And Shelby, can I use the moniker new? We're still going to call you new for another year, I think. But
I called myself new just about 2 hours ago, so that's okay.
Fair enough. She's got a real strong interest in cover crops, and she works with me a lot when I ask her about these crops. A couple of years ago at a field day, which we have there at the end of July or very beginning of August with this organization, I said, how about this male sterile high sugar sorghum? And she didn't say, hey, you're crazy, go away. She actually knew about it and was willing to work with us on that. So, Dr. Gruss, appreciate you coming on board with us. The podium is yours.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah, and summer annuals kind of got me, what really made me fall in love with forages and what they can do. And so very excited to be here tonight. Hopefully this last one keeps you awake as we finish off the webinar today. And I'm going to finish up kind of talking about intercropping with summer annuals, particularly looking at intercropping into an alfalfa stand. And so what we're going to kind of go over today is, where is your stand at? Because a really high productive alfalfa stand is really hard to compete with. So we need to be thinking about where our stand is and what our potential possibilities are for where our stand is at. Interseeding methods, and really thinking about how we can do this and do this successfully, and some guidelines for success when using this type of system. Now, I'm going to put everything in a little bit of an asterisk, because this is not really a new concept, but there is not a lot of hard research out there on this. And so some of the recommendations may be a little wide, but really be thinking about what works for your operation to be able to move forward. And so when I think about alfalfa as a perennial, I always like to talk about the previous year, because the previous year is going to be what's starting off our season now. And so when I started in Iowa, it was in November 2023. Almost all of Iowa was in red. We had a very severe drought throughout Iowa. There was pretty dry throughout the upper Midwest. And then by June 4th of 2024, we were completely out of the drought. And I remember talking to Madeline, and she says if we got out of that drought by the end of spring, we were going to have problems. And we did. We had a lot of ponding water, we had flooding, and alfalfa does not like wet feet. So we probably saw some potential susceptibility problems to our roots. But by the end of the summer, it dried out again. And so we went from being fairly good moisture throughout the continental US to drying down, especially in the upper Midwest, western Nebraska. Not going to dive into too much on climate. Madeline's got me way beat on that end. But just touching base on, we've kind of seen some extremes, and so that could be leading to some stress on our stands. And so really be thinking about how can we use this to know what we should do next. And so as we're coming out into spring, we should really be looking at our stands and assessing our stands and seeing what potential damage has occurred. And this stuff that I'm going to talk about right now probably was stuff that we would have been seeing about 2-3 weeks ago. But it's just nice, a little reminder, looking at green up. Are we seeing equivalent green up across the field? Are we seeing asymmetric green up, parts of our field that are greening up slower or faster comparatively to the other? Are we seeing delayed green up consistently throughout our field, maybe potentially compared to other fields in the area? Some things that could be leading to this is, as we went into fall, our plant starts to prepare fall buds. And if those fall buds get killed off, we have to build new buds in the spring to be able to regrow. And so that could delay that green up. Are we seeing uneven growth in our alfalfa stand? So are we starting to see half of the plant that's greening up and then half of the plant that's just not coming along? And so a lot of these things could be indicators of potentially a stand that's starting to weaken. And one of the things we should be looking at is that root damage, at least 4 to 6 inches into the ground, and getting an idea of where our roots are at. And potentially with our roots, we also should be looking above ground. And so many of you have already probably heard how to do a stand assessment. So we're just going to go over this really quickly, but looking for the number of stems within that square foot quadrat. If we have more than 55 stems per square foot, we have our potential highest yielding. We can reach our max yields potentially. As we're in that 40 to 55 stem range, we're at an okay stand. And then when we start getting below that 40 stems per square foot, we're starting to see a decline in stand and be thinking about doing something else. And so the way that this is kind of put together is you can use the equation that's at the bottom here. We can plug in our number of stem counts, say it's 50. If we plug that in, we can get an estimate of what our potential yield can be. Now I say potential yield because that is the max that we're trying to look for. That is what we're trying to get to. But depending on fertility and 100 other different aspects, that could be we may not reach that. But outside of that above ground, we really need to look at that below ground. And we were talking about that a little bit earlier. But really, what are our roots telling us? What are our roots telling us the chance of survival for the next year? Should we be thinking about rotating out? Especially maybe we got 50 stems per square foot, but we had considerable root damage in those roots. So we might be thinking that these stands may not be able to survive winter the following year, or they may be able to take one cutting off, but we don't think they're going to be able to last throughout the whole summer and start to taper off. And so when we're looking at these roots, we're looking for firm, white root tissue. That's an indicator of a really healthy root. But as we start to see some discoloration, we start to see some rot coming in, that is when we're starting to see these pressures coming in, and that over time, these plants are probably not going to persist as well. Roots with greater than 50% damage will not likely survive another year. And so if we're starting to see a lot of plants with that really high damage, even though we may have stems above, like in this photo, there's greater than 50% discoloration, but we still have considerable number of stems above. We may not be able to tell just by looking above ground, but that stand is probably not going to last as long as we'd like it to. And so as we're starting to look for our stands and our root health, we really should be having stands that have less than 30% of the plants in that 3 to 4 range. But if we start to see more and more of these plants having these root rots or root damage, crown damage, what can we do? What are our options as we think about moving forward? And so one of the options is rotate. Let's just kill the stand off, rotate into something else. A lot of times this is probably may not seem like the most ideal option. It can, especially when we're starting to see this damage in the spring, because we probably were relying at least on the first cutting of that alfalfa. These stand assessments can be done going into the fall so that you can see if you have an idea of what may not survive winter. And that may be give you a better idea of, oh, maybe I'll just kill my alfalfa now, rotate into a winter cereal before, or in giving it time to let that autotoxicity go out of the soils. If we're starting to see that delayed green up, maybe just delaying that first cut, giving that chance that alfalfa to regrow, giving a chance to restore those carbohydrates and kind of catch up can be really beneficial in that stand, especially if we're not seeing any root damage in that delayed green up, and it's mostly just that we lost those fall buds. Interseeding, that's really going to be the main focus of the rest of this talk today. And really looking at those perennials, but mainly those annuals. What can we do with those annuals? And then potentially nothing is necessary. We have a great stand. We can continue on life as normal. And so, but like I said, we're really going to focus on that interseeding. And when we think about interseeding, a lot of times when I hear people talking about interseeding, that we're talking about orchard grass, potentially interseeding with some oats, ryegrass, or red clover. And these cool seasons are great opportunities for potential for interseeding into our alfalfa stands. But at the same time, we got to be able to think about planting these early. And so a lot of times, if we want a successful interseeding, we're thinking about planting these in early April or frost seeding. This would give it a chance before that alfalfa greens up, giving it a chance for these plants to get out of the ground and establish before that canopy closes. In this photo here on the left, this is a photo starting to show some winter kill. This is kind of indicative of a good interseeding potential. We're starting to see some bare ground because alfalfa is very productive and can compete very, very well. We are trying to interseed something that doesn't have a root system yet with something that has a very established root system. Now that root system may be damaged, but it's kind of a balance. But for this year, it's kind of too late to really be thinking about these cool seasons. We're already in early May. Can't believe it's May 1st already. But we have a really good green up. I was out at a couple alfalfa fields today, and we're at anywhere from 8 to 12 inches tall here in the Ames locate area. And so we're a little late to be able to interseed some of these cool seasons. And so what are our options if we kind of are starting to notice that maybe our stand is not to where we're thinking? And that's where we come in with these warm season or summer annuals potential. And when I think about adding these into an alfalfa stand, I'm thinking, what can I get that can kind of match an alfalfa balance? And I'm thinking of these multi-cut systems. And so I'm thinking of sorghum Sudan grass, Sudan grass, pearl millet, and teff ? So when I was looking up some information on this, teff is listed as a potential, but teff is really small seeded. And so depending on how many bare spots you have, it may be really difficult for Tough to compete early on with some of these alfalfas, even on a weakened stand. And so maybe is kind of where I put out Tough, but I still have it on there because it is suggested in a couple of the different articles that I was looking into. And when we're thinking about planting these, is we're thinking about planting these directly after the first harvest, because we want those soil temperatures to warm up. And we want to be able to kind of give them a chance. And so removing that alfalfa, coming in directly behind it, and before it regrows, getting that in the ground, giving it a chance to establish and to be able to kind of compete with alfalfa and be able to grow. And so if we're thinking about our alfalfa stands, typically alfalfa, the first cutting is our highest yielded cutting. It's generally about 40% of our yearly yield. And then as we start going out to our second, third, and fourth cuttings, potentially fourth cuttings, we're about 20% of the rest of the season's yields. And so we start to taper off. And so coming in behind that first cutting, we're trying to kind of target a really good moment where alfalfa is not as productive. And so we have a chance, an opening potentially to start adding something else, adding a summer annual into it. And so when I'm looking at the summer annuals and thinking about that multi-cut system, how can that fit in the alfalfa system? And so this is just kind of relative planting date to harvest date based on some data that I did during my PhD. And so we planted early June, within 30 to 35 days, depending on the year, we were cutting our first sorghum, Sudan grass cutting. We had a second cutting 30 to 35 days, and then our last cutting right at the end of September, 30 to 35 days later. And so it was just kind of a balance, but that's kind of showing how maybe we could potentially intermix these and try to keep a high quality cutting or going while being able to push out for this next year. And so what this system would look like is we take that first alfalfa cutting, get potentially 40% of that yield of that year, and then we directly follow in with our sorghum, Sudan grass after that cutting. Then we take our first intercropping cutting 30 to 35 days later, and then kind of keep that pattern going to balance that quality and trying to boost that hopefully yield of the alfalfa as that alfalfa stand was dying out. And so when we're thinking about this, some planting considerations that I was going through and thinking about as how can we make this successful? Because if we look at this photo here, this was actually a study that was done intercropping with corn silage. Very healthy alfalfa stand. That corn silage is not looking that great at this point in time. It's struggling. And so how can we make our conditions favorable for that establishment of the summer annual? And first, we really need to check those herbicide residuals, ensure there aren't any plant back restrictions, and if there were, that they occurred. We don't want to start off on the wrong foot by just basically not letting it be successful at all. Those soil temperatures, making sure those soil temperatures are a bit warmer at that 60 degrees Fahrenheit at to 2 inches. This is going to help ensure quick germination of that summer annual. Having quick germination of the summer annual is going to be really important for it to be able to compete with the regrowth of the alfalfa. And then good weed control. Light disking is possible to help break up some weeds right before planting, and then getting that in the ground. And then our seeding rates. Seeding rates, I've saw anywhere from 3/4 of the seeding rate to 1.5 times the full seeding rate of your summer annual. And I think the variation kind of comes from the goals that we're having and where your alfalfa stand is at. If you have a fairly productive, okay stand of alfalfa going, people sometimes, I think the goal of the person that was putting it on, they didn't want to hurt the stand anymore. And so they're going for a little bit lower of a seeding rate, but just trying to boost the yield. Where if they don't care about the alfalfa anymore and they really just want a really good stand of that summer annual, they're looking at more at 1.5 times the seeding rate of a traditional just sorghum, Sudan grass monoculture or summer annual monoculture. And then when we look into the in-season management, we're going to managing for 2. We're not just managing for that alfalfa anymore. And so typically we don't have to worry about nitrogen in just alfalfa monoculture, but now we have a summer annual grass in there that does like nitrogen. And we may think, well, the alfalfa is going to supply that nitrogen. Alfalfa will give some nitrogen, but fixating nitrogen is actually a very energy expensive process. So the alfalfa is going to hold on to the nitrogen that it has the best that it can. And so we might get a little bit, but having that additional 50 to 60 pounds of nitrogen from that standard annual can be really beneficial to help boost those yields. And then the timing of the harvest. Multi-cut system, that's kind of where, like I've talked about, trying to match those together as best as we can, but they're not going to be perfect. And so kind of thinking about the dependent on the dominant species, what species is going to make up the majority of that cutting, and really focus on making that, whether it's high quality versus high yields that you're looking for, matching those animal needs you're going for. And then lastly, our cutting heights. Our cutting heights are going to have to be higher. Summer annuals typically like 4 to 6 inches. 4 is pretty kind of even low, really at that 6 inches mark, to ensure that really good regrowth can be really beneficial, raising that cutter bar. And then lastly, our harvest management. Can we still make dry hay out of these summer annuals? Well, summer annuals can be really difficult to dry down. Sorghum Sudan grass, those pearl millet Sudan grass, these summer annuals are really good at holding on to water. They're very drought tolerant. They're really good at it. So it makes it sometimes difficult when we're trying to do the exact opposite and pull water out of them. And so when you're thinking about potentially using this and harvesting for these, we really should be thinking about maybe switching it up and going into a baleage, haylage, or potentially a green chop situation, especially when we're looking at sorghum Sudan grass. It's very difficult to dry down, especially here in Iowa. Now, as we move further west, when it's where it's a little bit drier and there's less humidity in the air, we might be able to start pulling out more moisture a little better. And so then that might leading into those Sudan grasses and pearl millets becoming more of a viable option to make that dry hay. Now, granted, I still have a big bulb, maybe for dry hay. During the high heat of the summer, probably potentially a good option. Sudan grass and pearl millet typically have smaller stems, a little less moisture content in them, a little easier to get dry. But as we start going into the fall and it starts cooling off, it's gonna be harder to pull that moisture out. But if we do decide to make dry hay, let's make sure we're conditioning that summer annual, trying to break those stems and move that moisture out as best as possible, and be ready for longer curing times. It's going to take longer to get that dry comparatively to just an alfalfa monoculture. And so now I just want to take a step back and look at some data from Ames in the Sheraton, Iowa area. So this study was conducted in Ames and Sheraton, Iowa. And so Ames is centrally located for anybody that's not familiar. And then Sheraton's a little bit further south than Ames. And so this was done in 1989 to 1992. And so, like I said, it's not really a new concept we're talking about here, but really just trying to dive into what can make this successful. And so their goal was slightly different than just going into a stand that is a declining stand. They actually went into a very productive stand, but they were interseeding with sweet sorghum and forage sorghum. And they interseeded at their first year, the second year, third, and fourth year of that alfalfa's stand's life of production. They planted it in 30-inch rows, and so they were spreading out their sorghum. They planted it out a little bit lower of a seeding rate because they wanted the alfalfa to stay in the sand. And when they did this, since they were using a very productive stand, they actually banded paraquat over the sorghum row, 6 inches over that sorghum row, to give that sorghum a chance to come out of to come and germinate and have a chance to be highly productive. And so when we were talking just earlier, we're looking at declining stands where we're probably seeing some bare soil where the stand's not going to be necessarily as productive. So that step may not be necessary. And then they applied 63 pounds of nitrogen and 125 pounds of nitrogen, depending on the treatment. And what they overall saw was that this intercropping system increased their yields by 28% down at Sheraton and 38% at the Ames area. And this was across all their years that they were looking at it. They also saw some differences in nutritive value. They had higher crude protein with that alfalfa component in comparison They didn't see too much of a difference in NDF and ADF though in this study. One thing to note when they were looking at this is they also commented on their harvest composition. And so their first harvest was all alfalfa because this was before they interseeded. And so you have that clean alfalfa cutting. And then they went in, the second cutting was the majority of sorghum at this point. And so if we think back to when we produce a lot of alfalfa, the middle of the summer, we're starting to decrease. And so that's actually kind of favoring the sorghum. And then by the end, their last cutting, they only did 3. In October, they had a very evenly balanced mixture of alfalfa and sorghum in that final cutting. And at that point in time, we'd probably start transitioning from those high temperatures that sorghum loves, and we start getting into cooler temperatures, and the sorghum's just not going to be able to produce as well, where alfalfa can really range in what kind of temperatures it can tolerate. And so just some final considerations when we're thinking about this is when we're thinking about weed control. If we have a really a large amount of weeds in our alfalfa stand, it could be better to just rotate out and control those weeds and move into another crop. Because once we get that sorghum sedan grass established with the summer annual with that alfalfa, there's not too much we can do for weed control at that point. And then our harvest intervals, really just thinking about what is our goals, what are our animal needs. Longer windows, they will lead to greater yield recovery, but we're also going to start seeing lower quality in those. And with this system, we don't really have a perfect science yet of what it's going to look like if we cut in 28 days or 30 days. Test your feed before you feed it out. It's going to be really important to get an idea of where that is going to lie for feeding out, especially if we're thinking of feeding high energy need animals, to ensure that we are meeting those requirements. And so some final conclusions and thoughts is just where your stands at. Are they starting to decline where you're thinking, I really need to boost forage productivity this year, I need that extra forage? How can I extend that? And potentially using those summer annuals to extend that alfalfa stand's life for 1 more year. Consider your composition. That goes into thinking about those harvest managements as we're getting into when we should be cutting. Should we be cutting when the alfalfa is ready, or should we be cutting when the summer annual is? And hopefully they're pretty close together when we're looking at those multi-cut systems. Plan to help the summer annual establish. It's going to be really important for that to establish to be able to compete even with a weakening alfalfa stand. And then harvest strategies may need to be adapted, especially if you're already using dry hay. We may need to be thinking of something that we can harvest at a little bit wetter of a composition to get that out of the field in a timely manner. And with that, I thank you for having me tonight, and I'm willing to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Shelby. We appreciate the information. We had a question come in asking about frost seeding orchard grass, and Dr. Paulson commented that he doesn't recommend frost seeding grasses. What's your thoughts?
No, typically I would not recommend frost seeding grasses. They have a hard time working into the soil. When I mentioned frost seeding, I'm really looking at the red clover and some of the other clover species potentially to extend that life.
Okay. Sarah, did you see any other questions come in?
I did not. I don't see anything at this time. Shelby, I have had a few people try frost seeding with like Timothy. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I would think Timothy would be a little better just because it's not such a feathery seed as some of our other grasses are. I like things that just kind of are a little bit harder that can withstand a little bit of that working into the ground. I've not seen it done very much though, so I couldn't give you a good idea or a good feel of how that would work well.
Yeah, I was just curious because it's been a question I've got a couple times this spring. Not enough rain, didn't get it in when they wanted, and now they want to frost seed it. So that was my thought too. It's a little bit tougher seed, so it might work, but kind of hard to say.
Yeah. It'll probably work once and never again, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Okay, not seeing any other questions coming in. I'll thank our presenters, Shelby and Paul. I think Madeline has left us, but we'll give one final chance if somebody wants to just unmute their mic and ask us a question, or not hearing any. Paul, any last comments you want to share with the group?
I did see a question on the chat thing that was wondering what the market price was per relative feed value point. It's about $1 per relative feed value point currently. Otherwise, that's all I really would say.
Okay, very good. Shelby, any other final comments?
Nope, just thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you. Remind everybody that we do this as a monthly program, and our next one will be June 18th. And then also remind folks that we do a summer field day, and it'll be at a Western Iowa research farm. Shelby, you want to give me a little more information on that?
Yeah, so we're gonna have the field day at the Western Research Farm at Iowa State. It's in Castina, Iowa. We're gonna have a lot of summer annuals out there looking at grazing potential, silage potential of these products, and then also we will have a intercrop system, something similar to what we just talked about. I talked about today, and so I hope to see you guys out there.
Very good. We will make sure people are aware of it as we get closer to that July 31st date. So I'd like to thank everybody who joined us today. We appreciate your coming and hearing our presenters, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.